And I'm going to start putting the stream on Facebook, which will take a minute.
Hey, assalamualaikum everyone. If you're just joining in, we'll get started in about 1 or 2 minutes, inshallah. Alrighty, we'll officially get started. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Cynthia. I'm field organizer here at Empower Change. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon or earlier, closer to noon, depending on which coast you're on. Thank you for joining us for the Flying While Muslim Know Your Rights webinar. We are so grateful for your participation and also just coming to learn about this crucial and integral campaign that impacts our community. We'll go ahead and start with an agenda, a little bit of introductions. If you're just joining in, would love to have you all put in the chat, what's your name, where you're tuning in from, and also what your experience is like as a Muslim while flying. We'll go ahead and start. Bismillah, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi Shahi Sadri, wa yassir li amri, wa hlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Thank you again for joining in, and I hope all those who are registered, we definitely saw great interest level for this webinar. This really indicates to us at Empower that this is a valuable campaign, and it's really crucial for our community to better understand how our community is impacted and also profiled when it comes to flying in the US and outside of the US. So we'll do just a little bit through our agenda. We'll actually do a little bit of intros. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. I'm coming from North Carolina, and our staff is awesome. We're all from all over the place, which is wonderful. We'd love for you to drop your name, your city, experience while flying while Muslim. Here I actually included a photo from our website, the Flying While Muslim website that we have, that shows some of the experiences and stories that we've actually heard from our community already. And we'll have an opportunity later for you to share your story as a Muslim who's been flying before as well. As far as the rest of the agenda goes, we'll also have an opportunity to hear from some amazing speakers and panelists, have an opportunity for open discussion and Q&A, as well as hear a little bit more about the crucialness of this campaign and how it impacts our community. Let's see who's in the chat here. I see someone, I see Felicia from New York. I see Shrek from LA. I see Tina from Canada and Taha from NYC, Asata from Alabama. We've got Wenda from Sudbury, Ontario. Is this ON Ontario? I could be wrong. Is ON Ontario? We have, I know we also have Abdullah from New York, and we have quite a few more people hopping in. There we go. There's Abdullah from New York, Ontario, Canada. Fantastic. Awesome. Well, I'm so grateful and thankful that you all are participating. Inshallah, we will go ahead and jump into that next slide. So a little bit of context for this campaign. What is #FlyingWhileMuslim? And what is the context for this campaign? So TSA no-fly list is something that has tens of thousands of names, and many of these names are Muslim and Arab sounding. Roughly 10% of the names on this list are actually Muhammad. So that kind of indicates something to us, right? We also know that our stories really make a big difference, and our communities need to know their rights. We really want to, again, take advantage of this webinar for you to get to know what your rights are, how you can take action if you feel impacted in any way, shape, or form when it comes to flying, as well as knowing how your story is really relevant and important in this broader fabric of the Muslim community in the US. We also really want to take this opportunity to call on the community to document the impact of the ongoing profiling of Muslims and show the harm and the indignities that we faced when flying while Muslim. So definitely take advantage of this opportunity to really hear, really learn, and see how we can offer you different opportunities to stay involved on this campaign, because it is so, so important. A heads up on some of the speakers and amazing speakers that we're going to be having today. I have to tell you, this is a fantastic lineup. Like, I was so excited for this webinar because I knew we were going to have such a diverse as well as really well-rounded group of speakers who can speak to very different elements around relevant portions to this campaign. Of course, we're going to have Linda Sarsour from Empower Change here at home digitally. And then also we have Christina Jum from MLFA's legal division. We also have Basima Sismore from the Othering and Belonging Institute, we've also worked with before, so really happy to have her back. And then also Justin Sarowski from CAIR. So we will be hearing from each of these individuals for a little portion on a different element of this campaign moving forward. I want to just double check if Linda is here so we can get started on this slide. Okay, we can actually come back to this slide. So I know Linda's coming in, we can revisit, and we'll move forward for right now and actually jump straight into Islamophobia and its impacts with Basima, inshallah. Basima is going to be talking to us a little bit about the broader context of Islamophobia. What does this mean for activity in our communities? And also, what does the data tell us? So with that, take it away, Basima.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you for providing that opening and framing to the conversation, as well as for emphasizing the urgency of the moment and what's at stake for us as Muslims and our community at large. And thank you, Empower, for organizing this webinar and inviting me to participate. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today and speaking alongside Christina and Justin. So thank you again. And for my portion of this conversation, as Cynthia mentioned, I'm going to be talking briefly about the broader context and consequences of Islamophobia, and more specifically about institutional Islamophobia, what that means, how it operates, and how it impacts us as Muslims. So we're probably most familiar with Islamophobia operating at the interpersonal level. That's probably the most common way we think about Islamophobia, which we see manifest through individual actions or beliefs rooted in bias, prejudice, hate, and or exclusion of Muslims and those perceived to be Muslim. On the other hand, institutional Islamophobia operates at the level of institutions, such as the United States government. And we see institutional Islamophobia operate and exist through unjust US government policies and practices that target, scapegoat, other, and discriminate against Muslims and the Muslim community at large. And we see this happen both domestically within the United States, as well as abroad through policies that justify warfare in Muslim countries. So one such policy and example of institutional Islamophobia is the TSA no-fly list, the core of our conversation today, which profiles Muslims, deprives Muslims of their ability to travel, and causes significant emotional and psychological distress for Muslims. knowing that they're on the TSA no-fly list or that they'll be undergoing additional questioning, body scans, searches of themselves and personal items. That's a huge burden for us as individuals and does a lot of harm. So the TSA no-fly list is unfortunately one of 24 policies that disproportionately discriminate against Muslims. And we can track these back starting in 2001, so immediately following 9/11 to the present. And they span through the Bush administration, the Obama administration, Trump administration, to the current Biden administration. Other examples of institutional Islamophobia that manifest through policy are the National Security Entry Exit Registration System, otherwise known as NSEERS. And that went into effect in 2002 and ended in 2016. And through this policy, there were more than 90,000 Muslims who were registered under NSEERS, and thousands of Muslims were interrogated, detained, and deported for failure to comply with special registration requirements. Another policy which I'll mention and which is pretty well known is the Countering Violent Extremism program, which essentially encourages Muslim communities to self-police our own community and community members, and to identify people who might be on the track for radicalization, which is, how do you even know what that looks like or what that means? So it's a really troublesome policy. And then the Trump administration's travel ban, otherwise known as the Muslim ban. And so those are all policies that operate at the federal level. At the state level, since 2010, there have been 232 anti-Sharia bills, which have been introduced at the state level by state legislators. And 20 of these bills have been enacted into law. And the essence of the bills is to stoke an unfounded fear of Islam and Muslims, as well as to, in the states that have enacted these laws, anti-Sharia laws, to negatively impact and inhibit Muslims from fully engaging with our religion, with our faith, as related to marriage contracts, business contracts, trusts, and estates that are written in accordance to Sharia. So that's kind of an overview of an example of what some of these policies look like, and a little bit of the history behind it. And I want to shed some light on the consequences and the real impact that this has on Muslims and on our community. So these policies, under the pretext of national security concerns, and they've been justified through the quote unquote war on terror narrative, through the narrative protecting American rights and freedoms. These policies serve to justify the surveillance, profiling, wrongful deportation, and detention of Muslims, as well as to treat Muslims and our community as suspect, and to undermine our civil and constitutional rights. So very real, tangible harm. In addition, and by the justification of these policies that disproportionately discriminate against Muslims, the U.S. national security has been able to greatly expand its power, its budget, its reach, both on the foreign and domestic front. So these policies disproportionately impact Muslims, but they don't only impact Muslims. They actually impact all Americans and the very fabric of American society and democracy. So for example, since 9/11, there's been a great influence of changes within immigration policy, where national security is the focus, and previously separate issues of immigration and security are now merged into a single issue. And we also see the example of policing, where police departments use counterterrorism tactics and tools to combat street crime and to police communities. Institutionalized Islamophobia also, of course, enforces harmful stereotypes and beliefs about Muslims and the Muslim community, that Muslims and Islam are an inherent threat to American values and freedoms. And when the US president, such as Trump or other elected officials, promote Islamophobia or promote this fear-mongering, that has tremendous impact and influence on how Muslims are perceived by the American public, and also how American Muslims or Muslim Americans are represented in the US mainstream media. So when we talk about these policies, a lot of times we're talking about them as policies. They're kind of faceless. We're not connecting them to the people or the community that's actually experiencing the harm, the indignities, and the impacts of these policies. But the reality is that they impact real people. They impact Muslims. They impact people like us. And so I just want to commend Empower Change for this campaign, #FlyingWhileMuslim, as it does exactly that. It strives to uplift the voices and testimonies of Muslims who are being impacted by the TSA no-fly list. And to further emphasize how Muslims are impacted by the normalization of Islamophobia, in 2020, my colleague Sadiq al-Sheikh and I conducted a survey to assess how Islamophobia impacts Muslim Americans, to ask Muslims how Islamophobia impacts their day-to-day lives, and just to get a better sense, because that actually, a survey of this kind had never been done before. And the findings, although not surprising to us, are still very troubling. And I'm just going to share some high-level findings that are relevant to the conversation that we're having today. And so the first one, 62.7% of people responded that they themselves or family members, friends, or members of their community have been affected by federal and/or state policies that disproportionately discriminate against Muslims. And when I think about myself and my own community and network, I can think of individuals who have been directly impacted by these policies. And I imagine that there's many of us on here today who have similar stories, or who yourself have had to contend with that. Another important fact that I'd like to shed some light on, 67.5% of those who participate in the survey have personally experienced Islamophobia in their lifetimes. In assessing the social impacts of Islamophobia on US Muslims, almost a third of survey participants at some point in their lives have hid or tried to hide their religious identity. And Muslims censor themselves due to feelings of fear of how people might react or respond to them. 93.7% of respondents said that Islamophobia affects their emotional and mental well-being, and that's an area that is definitely understudied. And participants said that Islamophobia prevented them from building social connections with non-Muslims, and nearly 70% of people find it difficult to build community with other US Muslims because of Islamophobia. And lastly, in assessing US Muslim civic engagement, over 75% of participants feel uncomfortable making demands on their local authorities or congressperson. So these findings uplift the voices and experience and issues that Muslim Americans are facing, and they also show the chilling effect of Islamophobia on their daily lives, from the emotional and psychological impacts to impeding their ability to build community with other Muslims, as well as to be civically engaged members of society. And I'm actually going to stop here for now, and I'd be happy to share more a little bit later on the impact and opportunities we have as a community to challenge Islamophobia and Islamophobic policies, but I will put a pin in it for now.
Thank you so much, Wasima. I really appreciate you telling us all the data and statistics. Like even that's new to me as well. That like the stark outcomes in the results and the data that you shared with us. And thank you for adding that context to Islamophobia and how it's impacting our communities and how it's really broadly, very much so tied into the importance of this campaign. With that, I will go ahead and transition to our next slide here, and we will switch to our next speaker. There we go. So we will, again, tie this back to what's at stake and talk a little bit about what this leaked no-fly list is, why should we act now, why is this so important, and we will be hearing from none other than Linda Sarsour from Empower Change. Take it away, Linda.
Hello, everyone. As you can probably notice, I am outside in New York City and it looks like the end of times and my lungs are burning. So many folks know that in New York, we are experiencing smoke that is coming from the Canadian wildfires. And it's actually really, really scary to the point where you should definitely be wearing a mask outside. I'm not going to take too much time because we have incredibly brilliant friends here on this call. This is what they do for a living. This is why they're the experts in the area. I felt it important at Empower Change that we hold this conversation because we are now entering summer travel. Many members of the Muslim community, most of us who are children of immigrants or immigrants ourselves, spend summers across the world, especially in countries that have often been deemed as national security threats to the United States government, whether you're going to Pakistan, whether you're traveling to Palestine, traveling to countries in North Africa or other South Asian countries. There's always things that can come out and happen, and a lot of people don't have that information. And so that's why we're having this call. And I wanted to give you my own personal experiences. I was one of those quadruple S people. I'm sure a lot of Muslims have had boarding passes that have these 4 S's on them. You probably thought you were just extremely special. You probably didn't understand why you had the triple 4 S's on your boarding pass, but basically those are for special secondary screenings for most often people like us, Muslim leaders of institutions. Sometimes you're on the mosque board, or you're affiliated. Sometimes you're just a regular old Muslim person that has no high profile position in the community. And I actually had to be proactive to remove myself from some list that I was on in order for me to stop getting the quadruple S's on my boarding pass. And so for me, I think there are moments where we need to understand our rights. And I think I'm always one of those people, you know how they say knowledge is power, and people think that that's like really cliche. No, knowledge actually is power. Having knowledge, understanding your rights, being able to assert your rights on US borders is really important, and being able to understand what your ways you could address being on a watch list, not being on a watch list, understanding if you are on a watch list was something that I thought was extremely important as we head into the summer months right now. So I just want to say thank you to our friends Justin and Basima and Christina for being here, and knowing that we do have people in our communities that are well informed, are defending our rights to live freely, travel freely, and they have joined us here today. So we appreciate it, and looking forward to sharing this with our list and this recording later on. So thank you everyone for being here, and I appreciate you all for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. Really appreciate your time and sharing what's at stake, and also telling us a little bit about why we should act now, and also really contextualizing for us. With that, we will transition into our next segment and speaker. We have Justin Sadowski from CAIR. We're really happy to have him here, as well as all of our speakers, who will giving us a little bit more background and context, speaking a little bit on recent developments on this leaked watch list, and also what can people do if they're on the list. And with that, take it away, Justin.
All right. Yeah, my name is Justin Sadowski. I'm a trial attorney for CAIR. I've got multiple lawsuits against the watch list, ranging from challenges to the existence of the watch list on procedural grounds to constitutional grounds, to challenges to, I'm sure, many of the effects of the watch list that you're aware of, from including and most notably the searches and seizures at the borders, as well as religious questioning. I guess I can speak for the watch list for hours, but I'll speak as to the leaked watch list, since that's, I think, what people want to hear. A 2019 version of the watch list was left on a airline server, sort of exposed. One of the things about the watch list is they call it this sort of secret government list, but it's hard to keep a secret with 100,000 of your closest friends. And the reality is the watch list is available to every federal law enforcement officer, every state and local law enforcement officer, many private sort of entities and individuals who act in sort of quasi law enforcement applicants, from like college police to animal shelters who sort of do animal control. So the list is sort of distributed fairly widely, and one airline left it on sort of an exposed server, and a Swiss hacker named Maya was able to pull it from the server. It's a 2019 version of 2 of the 3 lists. There's 3 components of the watch list. One is the no-fly list. You all know the no-fly list. That's sort of the worst part of the watch list, because people on the no-fly list can't travel on an airline anywhere in the United States to or from the United States or over US airspace. It doesn't matter. No 4Ss, no extra screening. You just can't do it. Basically, ruining people's lives and making it almost impossible for people to travel in a modern society. there's two other lists. One is called the selectee list that was also leaked. The selectee list is kind of what we think of as sort of the broader watch list with the 4 S's, the border searches and seizures, the loss of security clearances and whatnot. And to be on the to be on the watch list, generally you need to they claim you need to be reasonably suspected of, and there's like a list of adjectives, but the broader word is to be related to terrorism in some way, and doesn't really matter what way. To be on the selectee list, there's a couple extra requirements, and the most prominent of that is that you need to be tied to a particular, or they need to think, the government needs to think you are associated with some particular terror group. If you are reasonably suspected of terrorism, and I'm putting that in air quotes, but not tied to a particular group, they will put you on the expanded selectee list. And from our litigation discovery, we are aware that of the 1.5 million people, about 15,000 US persons who are on the watch list, the large majority are on this expanded selectee list, which was not leaked. It was only the selectee list and the no-fly list that was leaked. CAIR got a copy of that list. I've actually seen that list. That's sitting on my hard drive right now, in fact. We've shared that list with experts who did a statistical analysis. They analyzed that 98% of the people on the combined lists that were leaked were Muslim, and well over 99% of the people on the no-fly list were Muslim. And the reason why you see that discrepancy is because one of the associated terror groups that can get you put on the selectee list is a Colombian Colombian extremist group that's trying to overthrow the Colombian government. And in fact, you know, when I looked at the list, I would if I saw a name that did not look Muslim and I randomly Googled it, it would be somebody who's very prominently came up as, say, for instance, the Japanese name I Googled, it was the person who did the sarin bombing in the Tokyo subway. When I Googled any Hispanic sounding name, it was invariably somebody who's sitting in a Colombian jail because they tried to overthrow the Colombian government. But when I Googled any Islamic sort of Arab name or Urdu name, it would come up sort of with no real news story, except I will say that one name I Googled did come up with a news story. It was a Palestinian activist who's been nominated for the Palestinian Peace Prize. And I will say I Googled one person who had a very sort of American name, and it was somebody who was arrested for working with ISIS. So what we see here is what we expected at CAIR to see, which is that two types of people get put on the watch list, right? Known terrorists. And that makes sense because if the government actually knows someone is a terrorist, and there's not that many people who are known terrorists in the world, certainly not 1.5 million, the government has no reason to not put them on the list. They've been arrested, they've been usually convicted, and there's really no, you know, those people end up on the list. And the other are people that the government doesn't suspect of terrorism. The reason why I say that the government doesn't suspect of terrorism, doesn't actively suspect of terrorism, is because if the government really suspected somebody of terrorism, the last thing they would do is put them on a list which has such obvious known consequences, such as getting 4 S's and being subject to secondary screening every time you go to the airport, being detained and having your device seized every time you cross the border. These things are so obvious that they give away. And when the government actually suspects someone of terrorism, they're not going to disclose, they do not want to disclose that information. So what ends up is whenever there's some random connection that doesn't create any sort of reasonable suspicion of terrorism, such as travel to a foreign country, we see a lot, or no, I can. Somebody asked if I could share the list. We're not going to share the list. That's sort of a violation of people's privacy, and it also violates the conditions upon which we were given the list. Or, you know, one thing we've heard from people sort of under deep cover is that, like, if the government like confiscate somebody they believe is a terrorist's cell phone. They'll put everybody on the cell phone on the list, and maybe that person is a terrorist. I doubt it, but let's give the government the benefit of the doubt on for this. Even if that's the case, somebody who has committed terrorist acts will have hundreds of people in their cell phone, most of which have no connection to whatever terrorism they're doing, right? They're going about their daily life. They'll have their cousins, they'll have their parents, they'll have their children, they'll have, their, legitimate business associates, their grocer, or, their accountant on the phone, people who, just randomly react. And so what we see is the watch list has, and I'm going to tie this back to something Basma said, is what we see is the watch list has this sort of viral effect in which people on the watch list, the people they're associated with, even if those associations are, the watch list is never, no one on the watch list has ever, as far as we're aware, committed a significant act of terrorist. The government has not claimed that any acts of terrorism are stopped by the watch list. So this is pretty holistically a list of innocent people, but people still don't want to be associated with people who they might be aware are on the terrorist watch list, or that they see things like constantly getting the 4 S's, because even though they understand that that person's not a terrorist, they don't want to be put on the list. And that's what we see, is people's associated with people on the watch list then end up on the watch list. And so that really is extremely stigmatizing. So that does go back to something Basma was talking about, of how because of Islamophobia and institutionalized Islamophobia, it's hard to make social connections, even amongst Muslims. As I said before, the watch list does contain 1.5 million names, about 15,000 of which are US citizens. So the large majority of the remaining people are probably people who will never interact with the United States, probably will never be affected by their placement on the watch list, will probably never know they're on the watch list. But for the 15,000 US persons, that's US citizens and permanent green card holders, their lives are, as you're aware, turned upside down. I'm sure Christina will get more into this, but people on the watch list will not be able to print their boarding passes. They will have to go to the airport in order to print their boarding passes. Those boarding passes will invariably have 4 S's on them. They will go through invasive secondary screening. They may or may not be searched by dogs. They may or may not be strip searched or have invasive pat downs. They may or may not be followed by the FBI or other agents through the airport and even potentially onto their flight. They invariably will be seized at air borders, but when returning to this country by plane, have their devices detained for several hours, have their devices searched, be asked questions, often religious questions. It's even more scary at land borders because they are all sort of the other travel things like pre-check will be revoked. You will probably be ineligible for a security clearance. You will have you could have transportation workers called TWIC credentials revoked. You may have lose access to military and other government office buildings and bases, and even past watch list status can affect you. For instance, Mayor Kalura, who we believe is, at least I personally believe is no longer on the watch list, was not allowed to enter the White House because of past watch list status. And then I'm going to move it on to Christina, and I'll just end with one thing, which is being on the watch list. Rather than tell you what you should do when you're on the watch list, being on the watch list is a significant, severe, and scary enough thing that what you should do if you believe you're on the watch list is contact CAIR, civil rights at CAIR.com, and we will, I don't want to give individualized do-it-yourself advice. We walk people who are on the watch list through everything they need to know, and I think that's really what you need to do.
Thank you
And
so much.
I'll put that on the I'll put that in the chat. The whole okay. How can we get the U.S. government to change these racist policies so they lives with us? CAIR's working on that. Beyond our lawsuits, we're actively lobbying the Congress who's never authorized the watch list to either to end the watch list exclusively, or at least to reassert control over the national security surveillance state.
Great. Thank you so much, Justin. Really appreciate you providing all that information. And we will go ahead and transition to Christina. Christina will be talking. Christina's from MLFA's legal division, CLCMA, and she is going to be really giving us the KYR here, or know your rights, and what rights and options do you have if you're worried, and also what are some progress that has been made on cases, and also do's and don'ts. With that, Christina, take it away.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And I want to thank Empower for doing this and for giving us the platform to share the information that we have been able to gain, because as several of the prior speakers have said, I think not knowing is the scariest thing, not knowing why something is happening or even how common it is. One of the biggest things that we've noticed with our clients is that they'll come to us and they're, uncomfortable, understandably, with what's been happening with them. They're hesitant to describe it. Once they start describing it, they feel a little bit embarrassed, maybe a little bit ashamed, definitely mad. And what we are able to tell them is what you've just described is true of probably 90% of our clients. So definitely people are not alone. I think the more that there is information sharing like this, especially from different organizations who may come at it from different points of view, then that's the best thing that we can do for the community, is to make sure that we do convey the information, get it across, and make sure that you're armed with as much knowledge, like Linda said, with as much knowledge as possible. That'll give you more power. So with that in mind, I want to do a little bit of an overview here. What rights and options do you have? Let's back up for a minute and think about where you might be. And again, that's going to tie in actually with the question that just popped up that someone said, which is, when do you become aware that you're on a list? And is it before you travel or while you're traveling? You're not going to get notified beforehand. So what your rights and options are extraordinarily limited in advance, but there are a few things that you can do to keep yourself informed and to make sure that you are prepared. Okay? So you won't know ahead of time if you're on a any portion of the watch list. You will know that something's probably up if you are not able to print or download your boarding pass in advance. If you have to go to the airline's counter once you get to the airport in order to get your boarding pass, then that's a problem. That's a big red flag that you are probably going to be somewhere on the watch list. If you're able to get a boarding pass at all, then you're not on the no-fly list. If you're on the no-fly list, you're not ever going to be able to print a boarding pass, and you'll never get through that first TSA screening, the security barrier at all. So you know that you are not on the no-fly list if you get anywhere past that, even if it may be difficult. So what you, again, getting into some of your rights and options, you don't have to, let me start with what you don't have to do. You don't have to give up the passwords or passcodes to your electronic devices, so to your phones or laptops or anything like that. And you don't have to give your social media, you don't have to give your social media passwords. None of that is necessary. I'm going to get to the second question that just popped up of, can you be taken off the watch list without legal intervention? I'll get to that in a little bit, because that'll tie in with something that I'm going to say in a little while. So what, and I will address it, but in about 5 minutes. So one of the things though, what you don't have to do, again, is that you don't have to give up the passwords. The government has the right to ask to inspect anything that you're traveling with. And that includes all of your electronic devices, but they don't have the ability, at least for the most part, and on site without extraordinary efforts, to be able to break into iPhones in particular, Apple devices in particular. So you do not have to give your passcodes. Understand that if you don't, then the government also has the right to detain your devices. So as opposed to detaining you for not doing that, they're gonna let you go, but they have the right to detain your device. So they can keep your phone, they can keep your laptop, your iPad, whatever it is, for up to 2 weeks if you don't give them the opportunity to inspect it. That is your choice. Either one is absolutely fine. If you choose to give the passcodes, what we often recommend is that people prepare in advance for the travel to make it go more smoothly, and that you do something like make sure that you don't have automatic login for any of your apps, because you don't want, if a TSA agent or CBP, Customs and Border Protection agent, or even FBI agent who's at the airport has your phone, has it open. You don't want them to have access to everything that is within every app that you have. You can back everything up to the cloud before you travel and then make your device pretty squeaky clean. That doesn't necessarily have to mean factory reset, though that does work, but you can also limit what's there and what's accessible, and upload all of your pictures and then not have any pictures on there. Those sorts of things. You can do that sort of stuff in advance of when you travel. And you can also state, once you've gone through the basic questioning, and I would say that that's equivalent to anything that would be on a customs form, so they're allowed, and it's perfectly justified for any government agent to ask you, where are you traveling to? Where are you going to stay? What are you going to do while you're there? What's the purpose of your trip? Those sorts of things. That's all normal. And that's all stuff that the courts will absolutely uphold the agents being able to ask you. But if they start going into things like, what masjid do you go to? How often do you pray? Who else do you see at your mosque? Those are not so normal questions. We do not ever recommend that anybody, and this is just across the board advice here, recommendations here, that we do in Know Your Rights type presentations as well. We do not recommend that anybody refuse to answer a question from a government agent by saying that they're going to refuse to answer a question. Don't just flat out refuse. What you do have a right to do once you get beyond those basics, once you get beyond the normal stuff like that, is that you have a right to say things like, I would be glad to answer your further questions with my attorney present. I am agreeing to cooperate. I am agreeing to answer your questions, just not right now, and not without my attorney present. If you want to call my attorney, we can get my attorney on the phone. We can arrange a time and get my attorney in the room and do this later. That particularly works if you're on an inbound flight, so you're on the return portion of your flight. That's something that can help too. So those are some things that you can do. And you also can file a DHS trip complaint. So that's Department of Homeland Safety, and the trip complaint is a traveler's redress complaint. It will tell you that as a practical matter, for the most part, those are largely, they feel useless. They feel like you're not going to get much from them. But they are something that the courts look at as a redress option that is available. So just check the box. Even if you don't get anything out of it, there's no harm in you doing it. There's no harm in you being able to walk into a courtroom or in front of whatever category comes up later to be able to say, I tried. I used everything that was available. I used the avenues that were there. And the government didn't cooperate. The government's the one that wouldn't answer questions and wouldn't give me things. So that's something else to bear in mind too. I will just follow up too. I see Justin put in the chat as well that you can mail your device over the border. That's absolutely true. But then you're not going to have one with you while you travel. And I know a lot of people, particularly women, are uncomfortable with that. You don't want to have a phone with you while you travel. So, or for safety and security reasons, you're going to want to have some way to reach people. So bear that in mind. And so I'm just, again, so you can mail it to yourself is if you're going somewhere, if you're going to go somewhere and stay there for a long time, you can mail things just like you would mail something or have something sent to your hotel in advance of a trip. That's something that you can do, but then you're not going to have it. So there's a give and take there, but I want to move on from that so that we can talk about some of the things that we have been able to do, some of the progress we have made, and some of the things that you can do, because we just talked about what you can't do and some things that are not useless or what you don't, or are not useful, or what you don't have to do. So I want to make sure that we address as well what you can do. I would say that, talking through all of this with an attorney is certainly something that can be helpful. I can put certainly MLFA's contact information. I'll put that in the chat as well when I'm done speaking. And you can fill out an intake and, get put in touch with one of our attorneys if that's something that somebody wants, as well as Justin has CAIR, I think, in the chat as well. So speaking to either of our groups, speaking to other attorneys and other individuals, those are things that you can do just to be prepared. That comes in handy more often if you've already had trouble, you're going to have trouble going forward. You always see those 4 S's, something like that. So starting with what you can do, again, you can file the DHS trip action if you know that that's going to, if you've already had a problem, or you continuously have a problem and you just want to get it on file, you can do that. If you have not been able to travel, to fly at all, then if you haven't been able to fly and you're on the no-fly list, that's the area where doing a DHS trip complaint is actually more likely to get you an answer. The government has to confirm for what they call US persons, and that means US citizens as well as lawful permanent residents or green card holders. So for people who are either US citizens or green card holders, the government has to confirm through the DHS trip process whether you are on the no-fly list. They don't have to confirm one way or the other, whether you're on any other version of the list, but they do have to confirm whether you are on the no-fly list. And then if they say that you are, then you would get to do a second letter and ask why and wait a little longer. It's not an efficient and fast process, but you will get a definite confirmation of yes, you are, no, you are not. And then you can ask why, and they're supposed to give you some amount of information that they can tell you as to why. Now, the first answer from what we've seen for our clients who have been on the no-fly list is that they usually get the answer at the first round is that you're on the no-fly list because you meet our definition of who should be on the no-fly list. Completely not helpful. Nobody would have gotten credit that as a vocabulary answer in school because you're using the word in the definition, not doing you much good at all, and not what the courts intended. So following up on that and pushing on that, much more helpful, and they got to give you something or state that they're not going to. And then that's something that you can do more with. I will tell you that through that process and guiding some of our clients through that, we have been able to assist. I don't know the exact number anymore. I know it's more than a dozen, but I haven't looked at exactly how many, but assist people in getting off the no-fly list and getting their names removed from the no-fly list. And they get this pretty letter that says on DHS letterhead, you are no longer on the no-fly list. And when they get that, we recommend they make a color copy and keep it with them for all future travel to help them out as well. Let me double check. I see several questions in here. So can a person be taken off the no-fly list without legal intervention? Sure, you can be. You probably won't be. You absolutely can be, but there's no reason for the government to do that because there's no pressure on them. There's no spotlight on the government and on the government's answers. And usually when we see the government make some progress for any particular individual, whether it's our client or others, it's when the government feels like there's a spotlight, they've been put in a corner. Maybe we filed a lawsuit and they have an answer deadline coming up. And just before the government's answer deadline is oftentimes when some of our people will get off the no-fly list. So again, if you want to have an attorney talk to you to prepare in advance, that's a personal thing. But like we said earlier, that's something that you can do. But it's better to do that. I would recommend that if you have previously been on the no-fly list and now you can travel, I would recommend speaking to an attorney, going through one of the the organizations here or another organization. I wouldn't go to your attorney, neighbor down the street who does tax laws and ask them about this, because it's not really the kind of thing where you're going to get the right kind of specialized advice. So I do think that you want to talk to an attorney who is specifically knowledgeable in this area. One thing that I also do want to talk about is where we've had some progress, and that ties in with another question that came up. So one of the questions that we have here, which is a great transition, so thank you for the question, appreciate that, is the government allowed to keep people in the airports for unreasonable amounts of time when they're coming from a 20-hour flight? They've had separated family members, not offering them breaks or rest or food or anything like that. Those are some of the areas where we have been able to make some progress so far. So like I said, one of the areas where litigation has made progress is that, at least for people on the no-fly list, the government now has to say specifically yes or no, you are or are not, if you're a US citizen or a green card holder. Other things that the government now has to do is courts will look pretty strongly at actual detentions of people. Not only are they just being inspected and they're going through every single page of a book in your bag, or they're going through everything that you have, but they're actually, detaining you. There are cells. I did not know before I started doing this work, but there are cells down in the basements of many airports. And we have a case on behalf of our client, Hassam El-Sharqawi, which we've done some speaking about, where he had been detained and handcuffed in the basement of LAX airport for 4 hours. That was determined to, there wasn't a direct ruling saying that that was inappropriate or unreasonable, but the government chose to settle that one, to do an offer of proof. so that he received some money and we resolved the tort claims on that part. And then the court decided that we could move forward with the claims that that was unlawful. And then other things happened procedurally that I won't get into here. But so that's some of the progress that we've made, is that there is more recognition by the judges that doing that, detaining people, particularly handcuffing them, that triggers, that triggers alerts that this isn't just inspecting for travel safety. So that's something else that really should happen, I think. And so I think another area where we've seen that ties in with another part of that question where we've been able to make progress is in separating family members. We have another set of clients, the Jabril family, and we brought a lawsuit on behalf of the 7 members of the Jabril family who had been flying together. And the youngest one was 2 years old at the time. And they all had quad S, so a 2-year-old received the 4 S's on his boarding pass, and they were separated. And even the young minor children were separated from their parents. And the government tried to say that in order to be able to bring a lawsuit, the legal term is to have standing. But basically, in order to have the right to enter the courthouse and complain about what had already happened in the past, the government was saying that they need to try again. And let's see if it happens again, because they don't know whether they're on the list or not. And so the courts came back and actually flat out called that a heartless argument and said, no way, you don't have to suffer the harm again. They have no reason to believe they're not. And it makes sense that they don't want to go through that again, or put their children through that again, or put everybody through that again. So there's not a hard and fast rule of what can't happen, but judges are starting to look at it more and say, yeah, that's not reasonable. It's a heartless argument to say you've got to suffer again in order to be able to bring your claim and to even get a court to hear it. And the more they do where they separate family members, the more harshly that's going to be looked at. It's not flat out forbidden, but the more harshly it's going to be looked at for sure. And another thing is looking at how much being detained, not handcuffed in a basement cell necessarily at the airport, but being simply detained, being slowed down and stopped and put in a separate room. Courts look at that, if it's brief, as a mere inconvenience. This is the term that they use, which is highly annoying to anyone who's had to endure it, is they'll refer to that as a mere inconvenience of delay. But if you are consistently missing flights, if you are consistently, not even necessarily able to travel on the day that you intend to, or to arrive on the day that you intend to, that is something that is problematic, and that courts will start to pay more attention to. And we had one judge recognize in another case of ours for our client, Mr. Abdulaziz Gaidi, that the act of flying was enough harm for him because he's a businessman who flew a lot, who traveled a lot. And so it wasn't so much necessarily a specific destination that he needed to get to that was a problem, but that it was the act of flying and needing to fly to do his business. And we have other clients where we've brought that as well. So those are things to keep in mind. I know that we are going to transition to the question and answer when I wrap this up, and I'm going to do that very soon. So I want to do just a little bit more of your do's and don'ts for about a minute or two more here. So on that, I will say, we already talked about how you don't have to give your passcodes, but decide whether you want to, and be prepared that the government can keep your phone for up to 2 weeks if you don't give the password. So that's your own personal choice, which way you want to do that. But another don't that I would say is understand that now that we've all seen most of us in this profession have seen the watch list as it was provided to that small carrier. What we see is exactly what's provided there, which is just names and dates of birth. That's it. They don't say why you're on there, which in a way is good, but in a way is bad because it makes the least culpable person on there just as responsible and just as suspect, really, as the most culpable person on there, the most suspicious person on there. So if you have somebody on the watch list who is this Colombian terrorist or somebody who's done damage, and they're in the same category, in the same box as the guy who just happened to go to the mosque as someone else that the government suspects, and that puts you all in the same category. So understand that the TSA agent in front of you doesn't know which one you are. If your name is on the list, that TSA agent doesn't have any more information than that your name made a flag pop up and it just says watch list. And it may say no fly if you're actually no fly, but then you'll have a whole bunch of companies showing up So that's pretty obvious to tell pretty quickly. So if you're on a watch list, a part of the watch list, in the selectee or the expanded selectee list, then the TSA agent in front of you doesn't know why you are. That also means that they can't answer you. So they can't tell you why you are, and they can't do anything about it. So don't give them a new reason to be upset by being mad at them. Save the fight. That's not the place for the battle. Save the fight for somewhere else. And then the last thing that I want to say is, again, knowledge is power, like Linda said. I am going to keep going back to her because I liked it how she said that. Knowledge is power, and that is a good thing that is helpful. And another thing that we have been able to do, the last thing that I want to leave you with on my part, is that we have filed a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests on behalf of many of our clients, and they take forever, and they are not fast. But we do get some responses and we get some information. And if nothing else, that may be the thing that puts a spotlight on the government that spurs some action and may get some people some progress. So keep pushing for that knowledge. You can do your own Freedom of Information Act request, or you can talk to an attorney. Again, as I said, I'll put our information in the chat. But those are things that you can do that would be good to just keep trying to get the more knowledge and most knowledge that you can. There's limited ways that we can do that right now, but for as many ways as we can, go for it and go ahead and push on all the fronts. And then that's how we're all going to be able to make progress together. Thanks very much. And I'm going to turn it over for a question and answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. We'll transition into the remainder of the questions, but all of you have been really good at answering them as we've been going
Can
along.
I just add like 2
Sure.
points before we go into QA?
Sure.
So I think, again, everything Christina said was good. I still think that if you think you're on the watch list, you need to discuss with a lawyer. There's a lot of the more details that Christina did not get into that need to talk. And like just one thing, for instance, that a lawyer can do for you is it's that you're not entitled to a lawyer at the border. You're entitled to refuse to answer questions to some extent, but not entitled to a lawyer. But what a lawyer can do is we can write a letter for you that you can present to CBP agents when you arrive. That letter can sort of introduce ourselves, represent sort of the person, represent the rights that they're going to assert, and help along the way. And those have been effective at reducing the amount of intimidation that agents have given people on the watch list at the border. So again, if you think you might be on the list, step one needs to be to contact to a lawyer. Again, CAIR will provide that for you free of charge, civilrights@cair.gov.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Justin. We will hop into our Q&A now. I know we're getting real close to 4 o'clock Eastern right now. So if you do need to hop off after 4, we will just be continuing questions. For those who would like to stay on for the remainder of Q&A, as well as the ability to submit questions now, you're welcome to. For the time being, I'm just going to run through the questions that we received during registration, and any of our panelists are welcome to answer these as we go along. So we'll try to fly through them, pun intended. Is it legal to video record a harassment event, and what legal action can be taken?
I will say real quickly, and then others may have something to add to this. We're talking here in this webinar about the context of while flying and while you're at the airports. I would not recommend that you videotape something at the airport. Also, there are some restrictions that go beyond the scope of this this webinar, and I think you have our contact information, or if not, I'll make it available in the chat. That there are some limitations that go well beyond here as to when and where and how you can record any kind of a federal agent. So the short answer on that is not recommended for at an airport. If the question goes beyond that, then I think it's something that's better answered outside of the scope of where we are now and what we're doing here today.
Cool. Do we have to hand over our devices or show data from our devices?
Yeah, and just to recap what I had said earlier on that, you don't have to you do have to hand them over, yes, because if you're traveling with them, the government's allowed to, the airport security is allowed to inspect anything that you're traveling with. But you don't have to give the passwords. Just understand that if you don't, the government has a right to detain the device as well.
Every time I fly, I get asked to step aside to pat my hijab down. Is this normal?
Unfortunately for the audience on this webinar, yes. It should not be, but it is here. And, I think what you can do is from the beginning, if you're asked to step aside, request a private pat down, request that you have a female officer and request that it be in private. And that may just take a bit of the edge off it or take some of the scariness out of it.
I want to sort of make a semi-contrary point to what Christina said. I do not believe, I will tell you, the government believes they have the right to confiscate your device, and they will confiscate your device, but I don't believe they have the right to. I think that's unconstitutional. I think we have brought and will continue to bring litigation in that regard. Just want to, I mean, you'll get your device confiscated. It's not going to practically change your effect, but if you would have a cause of action about it going forward.
Yeah, I agree that I also don't like it. I also would like to challenge it. And there's many different ways that a lot of us are doing that. So Justin's right. On that practical matter, they can do it right now.
All right. How do you deal with airport staff if you wear niqab or the face covering?
And I assume that that's about if you're getting, sorry, I just put that on a direct one. Cynthia, would you mind sharing that? And then I can answer the question. If you have face covering or you have niqab, again, I would say the same answer, that you certainly can ask to go to a separate room, go to a private room for a pat down, and you can ask for a female officer. Again, that'll give you just a little bit more privacy. I can't promise that it would be any less intrusive, but it may change the scene a bit and change the tone.
Yeah, the TSA who would be doing that is subject to a law called, that sometimes progressives don't like, called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which makes the government is not allowed to violate your religious beliefs unless it's the least restrictive means of enforcing a compelling government interest. And since what Christina just described is less evasive and less violative of your religious beliefs than what they would want to do, you have the right to do that, and that right is enforceable in terms of against the government in a lawsuit for monetary damages if they refuse. One of the few times you can sue a federal government officer for monetary damages, thanks to a case called Tanvir.
How are Muslim communities addressing internalized Islamophobia that lead to policy decisions that are harmful to all Muslims? I feel like this is a Basima question, but I'm sure anyone can answer.
Yeah,
I'm going to defer to Basima.
I'll feel free to jump in. I mean, one example that comes to mind is webinars like this, like know your rights, be able to, be empowered with knowledge and know what's within your rights, what the government can or can't do, to be empowered with that. And then I think I want to, if I could just take a minute to maybe pivot to kind of talking about some of the impact and opportunities we have as a community to challenge Islamophobia and Islamophobic policies. I mean, the Muslim community has been doing this for decades now, and it's through the formation of civil rights and advocacy organizations, research institutions, grassroots organizing, mental health resources, establishing Islamophobia as a field of study within academia, like the list goes on. But this really goes to show like the resilience of our community and the steadfastness of our community against the challenges that we face. And one way that I can say that we've seen like a direct impact of change that is really, really important is when our voices and our experiences are heard and are also accounted for. So our collective voice and power is kind of recognized and uplifted. And one example of that was, and I referenced the survey that the Other and Belonging Institute conducted. And in 2021, representatives Ilhan Omar and Jan Schakowsky cited that survey, our survey, to pass the Combating International Islamophobia Act. And unfortunately, that bill, it's in the Senate. I'm not sure it got passed through the House of Representatives. I don't know what's going to happen with it in the Senate. But the bill, if it did pass, would require the U.S. State Department to create a special envoy for monitoring and combating Islamophobia, which would ultimately help policymakers better understand the interconnected global problem of anti-Muslim bigotry. And it would establish a comprehensive strategy for U.S. leadership in combating Islamophobia worldwide. So, and that's to say that it wasn't our survey that did that. It was actually the collective voice and experience and uplifting the issues of the Muslim community and of Muslim individuals that provided the evidence for the representatives to be able to advocate for Muslims and to try to pass legislation that would ultimately combat Islamophobia. I'll say that.
Have any countries restricted issuing visas for travel to and from, I'm going to say Muslim countries like Palestine or Iran, Saudi Arabia?
So as not to leave the crickets answering the question for that, I will just say that we don't really we only come at it from a United States based point of view for within the legal division at MLFA, within the Constitutional Law Center for Muslims in America, which is the legal division. So we begin all of our points of view from a within the United States viewpoint. For that, that's as an explanation, that's why I really don't feel like I'm in the best position to answer as far as what other countries might be doing, restricting travel to, whether a second country is restricting travel to or from a third country is really outside the area of where we focus.
Okay. One more question we're at 4:05 now. So if anyone needs to hop off due to time, totally fully understand and respect. We'll send a survey afterwards that we would love for you all to fill out. And we're just going to hop through 3 more questions here and try to wrap in the next 5. Another question that was submitted through registration by someone was, if someone opposes certain governments because of their disregard for human rights, but now they have to travel to those said countries, what should they be prepared for?
I would say for that, definitely, that's one of the times you should expect that you'll get all that special attention and special treatment. Because, as I'm sure all of us here would agree that there are some countries where just travel to those countries alone is going to flag a traveler. Even if you were not Muslim, but if you're Muslim and traveling to one of these particular countries, then that's almost definitely going to get you flagged. So, and yeah, the ones that are listed exactly for Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, particularly if you're anybody trying to go to Palestine, is going to be more closely scrutinized. So just be more prepared to follow the rules, double check and see if anything's changed before you go to the airport, because sometimes the TSA rules do change. It's not as bad as it used to be for the frequency with which the rules were changing and the regulations, but just double check right before you go. Make sure that if you're traveling with a lot of cash, check to see whether it's above or below the threshold where you need to declare it, because if you don't declare it and you're traveling with a lot of cash to a suspect country, then you're gonna have a lot of trouble traveling for the rest of the time. But make sure that you're in compliance with all of the rules. Give yourself a bunch of additional time for the travel. So get to the airport instead of say 2 hours early for an international flight, I would say at least 4 hours early if you know that you're going to a country that is already highlighted.
We have 2 more in our actual Q&A submission portal here. Someone has asked, has there been any significant efforts on the governmental or legal side to address these disparities in profiling after the no-fly list was leaked?
I can tell you that, we filed lawsuits with equal protection grounds in Jardinay, our challenge to the watch list in the District of Maryland, which is ongoing and in discovery, that defeated a motion to dismiss, which means the government's argument that wasn't a plausible case failed, and so it's going to turn on some discovery that we're still fighting over to this moment. CAIR is also part of an active lobbying group trying to build awareness and within Congress, both House and Senate Judiciary, House and Senate Homeland Security. We've spoken with individual congresspersons. It's going to be a long effort. Nobody wants to see that they are opposed to terror. Opposed to they go in support of terror. So we're up against a hill, but we're working slowly through it. We spoke with a GAO just this past week based on an inquiry that Congressman Benny Thompson made. So we're building that. We're hoping to have hearings at some point in the not too distant future. And you can support that by supporting CAIR. You can support us financially, of course. We are having a Hill Day as part of a broader Muslim Rights Hill Day that's actually next week, Monday and Tuesday. We're going to the Hill. And one of the things we're going to be talking to congressmen about is the watch list. So we're working on both legal and lobbying and legislative challenges to the watch list. It's just, we are up against a conservative judiciary. We are, have a sort of indifferent, divided, hostile Congress. So it's just one of those things that takes time, but we've had some good results, and those good results will hopefully continue, and ultimately, inshallah, we'll defeat the watch list entirely at some point.
All right, we'll wrap up with one last question here before we do our conclusion and sharing of resources and survey and such. This question is more of a specific experience. I'm just going to summarize it for the purpose of the webinar. But an individual is asking kind of like if they've had a sort of altercation of sorts and nothing was taken away from them. They were not necessarily told, that any of their things had to be confiscated or anything. However, they did have their global entry privilege revoked. What should that individual do?
Yeah, I would recommend in that situation certainly to, at a minimum, file a DHS chip complaint. There's also a way that's through the Department of Homeland Security's website where you can challenge directly as to global entry. I will tell you though, and warn you that global entry as well as TSA PreCheck are considered privileges, not rights, because they are extra. And so the courts handle those a lot differently than they will handle whether a constitutional right has been changed, because nobody has a constitutional right to be in the fast lane, to have global entry. So it's a little bit more of an uphill battle. It's a little bit tougher, but it is certainly, it works better if your challenge is more that is indicative that something changed and that you're treating that more as the symptom, and you're using that as your challenge to say something's different. I'm now being treated differently than I was before. I had this, I got it. What was wrong? What's different now? What's something else? And then I will also just point out, and this maybe where we need to wrap it up then, that as mentioned in the chat by our hosts, where they state that there will be ways for people to get involved in grassroots efforts going forward, as long as you just indicate that on the post-webinar survey. So all of us are doing things in different formats, in different ways, where we are trying to help, again, shine the light, keep the visibility going, and keep gaining more knowledge that we can use. And you can help us doing that if you're interested by following up with our hosts here and by contacting each one of us at the contact information that's available inside the chat. With that, I'll toss it back.
I'm going to push back on what Christina said a little bit because I don't entirely agree. It is a privilege, not a right. That being said, you cannot necessarily take a privilege away for any reason at all. You have rights tied to privileges for a variety of reasons. One, the Equal Protection Clause prevents the government from giving privileges to some people and not other people in an inappropriate way, or based or not based on a protected characteristic. There's something called the stigma plus element of the Due Process Clause, which says that if the government takes away a status, even if it's a privileged status, because of stigma that the government created, that requires certain due process rights, much like other rights have. I will also say, relative to that, though, if your global entry or other privilege is revoked in relation to your watch list status, you probably have clearer and more direct ways to attack the watch list designation than just that status alone.
All right, for sake of time, we will be wrapping up now. We'll get into that next slide here. Just want to thank everyone. Thank you so much for holding tight and being such an engaging audience, asking all of these questions and really taking the time to just learn. I mean, the purpose of this webinar was really just personal education and for us to really connect as a community and understand each other's stories, as well as really inform ourselves as individuals too. And you understand that this is a big issue and it impacts a lot of people. With that, just to tradition here at Empower Change, we always end with a dua because we always do ask for Allah to grant ease for us. I ask Allah to grant ease for everyone in our community, all those who are suffering from every kind of shape or form of injustice, for everyone to get the justice that they deserve, for our communities to be protected, to be kept safe, and for our communities to be better understood, and for our justice systems to be improved, and for the great work that our community members, such as all the organizations we partnered with today, for their work to continue to have barakah in it so that we can continue to help as many people as possible. Thank you all so much for joining. There will be a survey that I really hope every single one of you are able to fill out. We'll be sure to send over the survey, as well as the slide deck will be sent to you in addition to some resources. Please take advantage of those resources. We were really fortunate to partner with so many awesome organizations today, and thank you so much. All right, assalamu alaikum. Bye, everyone.